Hollywood, the city of dreams. For every star that shines bright on its boulevards, there are 1,000 untold stories of those who chased the same light, only to be lost in the shadows. Today, we're not talking about the glitz and glamour. We're talking about a story that has haunted this city for decades. It's a story you think you know, but the headlines only ever told you the ending. We're going back to the beginning, to uncover the life of the young woman who would become known as the Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short. Before the infamous nickname, before the gruesome discovery that shocked a nation, she was just Betty. A girl with a hopeful heart and eyes that mirrored the silver screen. Her story begins far from the palm trees of Los Angeles, in the quiet suburbs of Boston. Born in 1924. From the start, life wasn't easy. Her father, a man who built miniature golf courses, lost everything in the 1929 stock market crash. One day, he parked his car by a bridge and simply vanished. The family presumed the worst, that he had taken his own life, leaving his wife Phoebe and their 5 daughters to fend for themselves during the Great Depression. Growing up without a father and in poverty left its mark on young Elizabeth. She was a frail child, battling severe asthma and bronchitis. The cold New England winters were brutal on her lungs. Her mother, working tirelessly to support the family, sent Betty to spend winters in the warmer climate of Florida. It was during these lonely months away from home that Elizabeth developed a love for movies. She would spend hours in darkened theaters, captivated by the larger-than-life figures on screen. They were her escape, her companions. She dreamed that one day, she too would be up there, adored by millions. This dream wasn't just a fleeting fantasy. It became her driving force. Elizabeth was striking. She had pale skin, piercing blue eyes, and a cascade of dark hair she often adorned with flowers. She knew her looks could be a ticket out of her difficult life. She cultivated a certain mystique, a persona that was part glamour, part vulnerability. She was a daydreamer, often lost in her own world, a world where she was a star. Then, a shocking twist. When Elizabeth was a teenager, a letter arrived. It was from her father. He wasn't dead after all. He was alive and well, living a new life in California. The revelation was a seismic shock to the family. For Elizabeth, it was more than just the return of a long-lost parent. It was a sign California, the land of movies, the land of opportunity. Her father was her link to that world. At 19, with her mother's blessing, Elizabeth packed her bags and boarded a train heading west. She was going to live with a father she barely knew, in the state where dreams were made. Imagine the hope she must have felt, watching the country roll by, each mile bringing her closer to Hollywood. But the reality of her new life was a far cry from the fantasy. Her father, Cleo Short, was a stern, controlling man. Their reunion was not the warm embrace she had imagined. They clashed constantly. He disapproved of her lifestyle, her desire for a social life, her laziness. To him, she was just an irresponsible teenager, not the budding starlet she saw in the mirror. The tension became unbearable. After a few short months, he kicked her out. 19 years old, alone in a new state, with no money and nowhere to go. This was a pivotal moment. Elizabeth could have given up, gone home defeated, but she didn't. The dream of Hollywood had its claws in her, and she wasn't letting go. She found work as a waitress at Camp Cook, a military base near Santa Barbara. It was here she found a community of sorts. She was popular with the soldiers, who were charmed by her beauty and vivacious personality. For a brief time, she was happy. She was even voted Camp Cutie. But her time there was short-lived. In late 1943, she was arrested for underage drinking at a local bar. As a minor, the authorities decided to send her back home to Mexico. But Elizabeth was stubborn. She only made it as far as Florida, refusing to return to the life she had fought so hard to escape. She spent the next few years drifting. Florida, Massachusetts, back to California, then back to Florida. She was a transient, moving from city to city, always searching for something she couldn't quite find. She worked odd jobs, mostly as a waitress, but she never held a job for long. She relied on the kindness of acquaintances and the attention of men who were captivated by her. She wrote letters home, painting a picture of a glamorous life, hinting at movie auditions and promising careers. But the reality was a string of cheap apartments, borrowed money, and fleeting relationships. One of her most significant relationships during this time was with a decorated Army Air Force officer, Major Matt Gordon Jr. They met in Florida, and by all accounts, they were deeply in love. He was stationed overseas, but he wrote to her constantly. He even proposed marriage in a letter. For Elizabeth, this was it. The stability she craved, the love she deserved. She accepted his proposal and started planning their future. But tragedy struck again. Just before he was due to return home, his plane crashed in India. Ayahuasca Elizabeth was devastated. The one stable, promising thing in her chaotic life was gone. Friends said a light went out in her after Matt's death. Her grief was profound. She started telling people they had been married and had a child who died in infancy. It wasn't true, but perhaps this tragic story was easier to tell than the painful truth of another dream snatched away. In the summer of 1946, Elizabeth made her final journey to Southern California. This time, she was more determined than ever. She was 22, and time felt like it was running out. She settled in Hollywood, sharing rooms with other aspiring actresses, floating on the periphery of the studio system. She was a familiar face in the Hollywood hangouts, always impeccably dressed, often in black. This is when she reportedly earned the nickname the Black Dahlia, a play on the popular film noir. The blue dahlia and a penchant for dark clothing and flowers in her hair. Her life in these final months is a blur of conflicting accounts. She was a phantom, moving between cheap hotels and the apartments of friends and acquaintances. She was constantly on the move, never staying in one place for more than a few days. She dated a string of men, from salesmen to servicemen, but none of the relationships lasted. She was known to be a teaser, someone who enjoyed the attention and gifts from men but rarely became intimate with them. She was always chasing a meal, a place to sleep, a connection that might lead to her big break. The last person known to have seen her alive was a man named Robert Red Manley, a married salesman she had been dating briefly. On the evening of January 8th, 1947, they went on a date. The next day, he drove her to the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She told him she was meeting her sister, who was visiting from Boston. He watched her walk into the grand lobby of the hotel around 6:30 p.m. She smiled, waved goodbye, and disappeared inside. That was the last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short. For the next 6 days, she vanished. No one knows for sure where she went, who she was with, or what happened to her during that lost week. Her friends and roommates weren't immediately alarmed. Elizabeth was known to drop out of touch for days at a time. They assumed she had found a new place to stay, or a new man to look after her. But this time was different. 6 days later, on the morning of January 15th, 1947, a mother walking with her young child in a vacant lot in the Leimert Park neighborhood made a horrifying discovery. At first, she thought she was looking at a discarded mannequin. But as she got closer, the terrible truth became clear. It was the body of a young woman. It was Elizabeth Short. The story that followed would become one of the most sensational and enduring mysteries in American history. But what's often lost in the grisly details of her death is the story of her life. A story of a young woman from a broken home, burdened by illness, but buoyed by an unbreakable dream. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was a hopeful romantic and a perpetual wanderer, always searching for a home, for love, for a place to belong. She chased the Hollywood dream with everything she had, but in the end, the city that promised her stardom consumed her instead. The case of the Black Dahlia was never solved, but by remembering Elizabeth Short for the life she lived, not just the brutal way she died, we can give her back some of the humanity that was so cruelly stolen from her. Her story is a cautionary tale, a dark chapter in Hollywood's history, and a poignant reminder of the countless dreamers who, like Elizabeth, just wanted to see their name in lights. It was a cold January morning in 1947, in the quiet, developing neighborhood of Leimert Park, Los Angeles. A local mother, Betty Bersenger, was out for a walk with her young daughter. As they passed a vacant lot, something caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a discarded mannequin, oddly pale and broken in two. But as she drew closer, a wave of horror washed over her. This was no mannequin. It was the body of a young woman, posed with a chilling, theatrical precision. The discovery would ignite one of the most infamous and baffling unsolved murder cases in American history. This is the story of the Black Dahlia. The victim was soon identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, an aspiring actress with porcelain skin, striking blue eyes, and a cascade of dark hair. Her nickname, the Black Dahlia, was allegedly coined by patrons of a local drugstore a nod to the popular film noir, The Blue Dahlia, and her preference for black clothing. Elizabeth had drifted to Hollywood from Massachusetts, like so many others, chasing a dream of stardom. She worked odd jobs, mostly as a waitress, and navigated a transient life, moving between cheap hotels and acquaintances' apartments. She was known for her beauty and her captivating, if somewhat mysterious, presence. But her life was cut tragically short, and the manner of her death would overshadow everything she had ever hoped to become. The crime scene was unlike anything even the most seasoned LAPD officers had ever witnessed. Elizabeth Short's body had been severed cleanly at the waist. There was no blood at the scene, indicating she had been killed elsewhere and her body drained of blood before being dumped in the vacant lot. The two halves of her body were positioned about a foot apart. Her face was grotesquely mutilated, slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating a terrifying, permanent grin known as a Glasgow smile. Her body was also covered in cuts and bruises, and pieces of her flesh had been removed. The killer had meticulously cleaned the body, washing away any potential evidence. It was a calculated, sadistic display, designed to shock and terrify. The sheer brutality of the act sent a shockwave through the City of Angels. The Los Angeles Police Department, or LAPD, launched one of the largest manhunts in its history. Hundreds of officers and detectives were assigned to the case. They interviewed countless individuals who had known Elizabeth, from former roommates and boyfriends to casual acquaintances. Her transient lifestyle made the task incredibly difficult. She had a wide network of contacts, but few people knew her well. The investigation retraced her final days, trying to piece together a timeline. She was last seen alive on January 9th, 1947, at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. After that, she vanished. The 6 days between her last sighting and the discovery of her body became known as her missing week, a blank slate that investigators desperately tried to fill in. The media frenzy was immediate and relentless. Newspapers, locked in a fierce circulation war, plastered Elizabeth Short's face on their front pages. They dubbed aired the Black Dahlia, and the name stuck, adding a layer of dark glamour to the horrific crime. Reporters were ruthless, often blurring the lines between reporting and interfering with the investigation. They published sensationalized stories, many of which were outright fabrications, painting Elizabeth as a promiscuous party girl. They printed her personal letters, interviewed anyone who claimed to know her, and created a narrative that was often more fiction than fact. This intense media coverage both helped and hindered the case. It kept the story in the public eye, but it also generated a flood of false tips and bogus confessions that swamped the police. One of the most bizarre chapters of the case began about a week after the body was found. James Richardson, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner, received a phone call. The caller claimed to be the killer and offered to send proof. Soon after, a package arrived at the newspaper's office. Inside was a collection of Elizabeth Short's personal belongings, her birth certificate, social security card, photographs, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. The items had been wiped clean with gasoline, erasing any fingerprints. The killer, it seemed, was taunting the police and the press, playing a twisted game. Over the next few weeks, more letters, composed of words cut and pasted from newspapers, were sent to the press, filled with cryptic messages and promises to turn himself in, which never happened. The investigation explored numerous leads and suspects. Mark Hansen, the owner of the address book, was a nightclub and theater owner who had let Elizabeth stay at his home briefly. He was questioned extensively, but was ultimately cleared. The list of potential suspects grew to be enormous. It included doctors, who would have had the surgical skill to perform the bisection, as well as soldiers, drifters, and even Hollywood figures. Dozens of people, likely seeking a moment of morbid fame, falsely confessed to the crime. One man, a local bellhop, passed a lie detector test, only to later recant his confession, claiming he just wanted the attention. Each lead was a dead end, each suspect an eventual alibi. The killer was like a phantom, leaving a trail of horror but no tangible clues. The LAPD was under immense pressure. The public was terrified, and the media was relentless in its criticism of the department's failure to solve the case. The investigation was plagued by internal conflicts, lost evidence, and the sheer volume of misinformation. Theories ran wild. Was it a jealous lover, a mad doctor, a serial killer? Some even speculated about connections to other unsolved crimes in the area, like the Cleveland torso murders. The case files grew to thousands of pages, but a clear suspect never emerged. The investigation went cold, but it never truly closed. It remains officially open with the LAPD to this day. Over the decades, the Black Dahlia case has become a permanent fixture in American true crime lore. It has inspired dozens of books, films, and television shows. The mystery has captivated generations of amateur sleuths and professional investigators. New theories and suspects continue to emerge, even now, more than 75 years later. Some authors have claimed to have solved the case, pointing fingers at individuals like George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles physician whose own son, a retired LAPD detective, built a compelling case against him after his death, yet without a confession or definitive DNA evidence, which is impossible to obtain after all this time. These remain just theories. The tragic story of Elizabeth Short serves as a dark and cautionary tale. She was a young woman with dreams, whose life was stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. Her identity became forever fused with the gruesome details of her death, her humanity often lost in the spectacle. The Black Dahlia case is more than just an unsolved mystery. It's a chilling reminder of the dark side of Hollywood's golden age, a story of ambition, obsession, and the ultimate, terrifying price of fame's shadow. The image of her body, broken and discarded in that vacant lot, is a haunting puzzle that Los Angeles and the world has never been able to piece back together. The ghost of the Black Dahlia still lingers, her killer's identity forever lost to the mists of time. Last time, we explored the gruesome discovery of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. Today, we're stepping into the labyrinth of suspects, a twisting maze of shadows and scandals that has baffled investigators for decades. Who could have committed such a brutal crime? The list of potential culprits is staggering, and it reads like a who's who of mid-century Los Angeles. From respected doctors to shadowy underworld figures, jilted lovers, and even Hollywood's elite. Let's start with the doctors. The surgical precision of the bisection led many to believe the killer had medical knowledge. Several physicians came under suspicion. One of the most prominent was Dr. George Hodel. His own son, a retired LAPD detective named Steve Hodel, would later build a compelling, albeit circumstantial, case against him. Steve discovered photographs of a woman resembling Elizabeth Short in his father's possessions, along with handwriting samples that seemed to match the taunting notes sent to the press. He even brought in a cadaver dog to his father's old home, the famous Soden house, which alerted in several areas, suggesting the presence of human remains. George Hodel was a known associate of surrealist artist Man Ray, whose work often featured dismembered mannequins, adding another layer of macabre artistry to the theory. Despite being a prime suspect in his son's eyes, George Hodel was never charged, and he left the country shortly after the investigation began, living abroad for years. Then there were the criminals, the denizens of a Las seedy underbelly. Elizabeth Short was known to frequent bars and nightclubs, and she inevitably crossed paths with some dangerous individuals. Mob figures like Bugsy Siegel had connections all over the city. Could she have been entangled in a mob dispute or witnessed something she shouldn't have? The problem with this theory is the highly ritualistic and personal nature of the crime. A typical mob hit is quick and efficient to bullet, not a week of torture and mutilation. This seemed different, more intimate, more psychological. Still, many small-time crooks and hustlers were questioned. In the frenzy following the murder, dozens of people, mostly men, actually confessed to the crime. The police had to wade through a sea of false confessions, a frustrating process that wasted precious time and resources. Each confession had to be vetted, and one by one, they were all debunked. Of course, we can't ignore the lovers. Elizabeth was a young, attractive woman who reportedly had a string of admirers and boyfriends. The investigation delved deep into her personal life, tracking down men she had dated or corresponded with. One key figure was Robert Red Manley, a married salesman who was one of the last people known to see her alive. He dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA, days before her body was found. Manley was questioned extensively and passed a polygraph test, eventually being cleared. But what about others? Was there a jealous lover, a suitor she rejected, who flew into a violent rage? Her transient lifestyle and the many letters she wrote and received made tracing all her romantic connections a monumental task. The police were chasing ghosts, fragments of relationships pieced together from hearsay and old mail. And then there's Hollywood. This is where the story takes on a truly cinematic quality. Elizabeth Short was an aspiring actress, one of thousands of young women who flocked to Los Angeles with dreams of stardom. The casting couch culture was a dark, open secret. Powerful producers, directors, and studio executives held the keys to the kingdom, and many were known to exploit their power. Rumors have swirled for years, linking the Dahlia case to powerful Hollywood figures. One persistent theory involves a clandestine abortion clinic that catered to the rich and famous. Did Elizabeth become pregnant by a powerful man who couldn't afford a scandal? Did a botched procedure lead to her death and a subsequent cover-up? This theory would explain the medical precision of the cuts and the immense effort to derail the investigation. This brings us to the heart of the scandal, the LAPD itself. The investigation was, by many accounts, a catastrophic failure, plagued by corruption, cover-ups, and internal politics. The 1940s LAPD was notoriously corrupt. Evidence mysteriously disappeared from the case file, including the original envelope from the killer's package sent to the press. Was this simple incompetence, or was someone on the inside actively sabotaging the investigation? The press ran wild with the story, publishing sensationalized details and taunting notes from the supposed killer, creating a media circus that hampered real police work. Some researchers argued that the police knew far more than they ever let on. Perhaps they identified a powerful suspect early on. A politician, a studio head, or even a fellow officer, and were pressured to look the other way. The case became a hot potato, a political nightmare that no one wanted to solve, if it meant bringing down the city's elite. The sheer number of suspects and the chaotic nature of the investigation provided the perfect cover. It was easier to let the case go cold than to expose the rot at the core of Los Angeles. So, who killed the Black Dahlia? A sadistic doctor playing out a dark fantasy, a mob enforcer sending a message, a spurned lover consumed by jealousy? Or was she a casualty of Hollywood's dark side, her murder covered up by a corrupt system designed to protect the powerful? The suspects are a cast of characters from a Raymond Chandler novel, their motives lost in the shadows of post-war Los Angeles. The trail of evidence leads in a dozen different directions, each path ending in a frustrating dead end. The corruption and chaos surrounding the case ensured that the truth might never be found, leaving the Black Dahlia's murder as a permanent scar on the city's history. A story that has puzzled detectives, captivated writers, and haunted the public imagination for decades. Today, we are rediving deep into one of America's most infamous and disturbing unsolved mysteries. The case of the Black Dahlia. On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a woman walking with her young daughter in a vacant lot in Los Angeles made a horrifying discovery. What she first thought was a discarded mannequin was, in fact, the body of a young woman. But this was no ordinary crime scene. The victim's body had been surgically bisected at the waist, drained of blood, and meticulously cleaned. Her face was slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating a grotesque and permanent smile. Often called a Glasgow smile. The scene was so gruesome, yet so precise. It suggested a killer with both monstrous cruelty and a chilling level of anatomical knowledge. The victim was soon identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, an aspiring actress with striking black hair and a penchant for black clothing, which earned her the posthumous nickname, the Black Dahlia. She had drifted to Hollywood, like so many others, with dreams of stardom. Instead, she became the star of a real-life horror story. The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented. Newspapers, locked in a fierce circulation war, sensationalized every detail of Elizabeth's life and death. They painted her as a mysterious, elusive figure, femme fatale, who roamed Hollywood's nightlife. They published her photos, letters, and even details from her autopsy report. This intense, and often unethical, media coverage turned the investigation into a public spectacle. The police were inundated with tips, false confessions, and letters from someone claiming to be the killer. One of the most tantalizing aspects of the case was the communication from the supposed murderer. Shortly after the discovery of the body, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner received a package. Inside were Elizabeth's short social security card, birth certificate, photographs, and an address book with some pages torn out. The items had been wiped clean with gasoline, erasing any fingerprints. The sender also included a taunting note, pieced together from newspaper clippings, that read, "Here are Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." And letters did follow. A series of handwritten notes were sent to the press and police, taunting them and promising to turn himself in, which he never did. The police were overwhelmed. They interviewed over 150 suspects, and more than 60 people confessed to the murder over the years. Yet, every lead went cold. Every suspect was eventually cleared. The killer was like a ghost, leaving behind a trail of terror but no solid evidence. So, why does this case, over 75 years later, still have such a powerful grip on us? For one, it's the sheer brutality and theatricality of the crime. The killer didn't just murder Elizabeth Short. He turned her body into a horrifying piece of art, a public display of his power and sadism. The precision of the bisection and the lack of blood at the scene suggested the crime happened elsewhere, and the body was carefully posed. This level of planning and audacity is what makes the case so profoundly disturbing. Furthermore, the Black Dahlia case essentially wrote the playbook for modern true crime. The media's role in shaping the narrative, the public's obsessive fascination, the deluge of amateur sleuth soul. These elements are staples of the true crime genre today. The case exposed the dark underbelly of post-war Hollywood, a world far from the glitz and glamour seen on screen. It was a world of broken dreams, desperation, and hidden dangers. The mystery has also been a fertile ground for writers and filmmakers. It's the ultimate whodunit. James Ellroy's masterful 1987 novel, The Black Dahlia, is perhaps the most famous example. Ellroy, whose own mother was murdered in a still unsolved case, brought a personal, obsessive energy to the story. His novel, and the 2006 film adaptation directed by Brian De Palma, plunged a new generation into the shadowy world of 1940s LA and the hunt for Elizabeth's killer. Countless other books, documentaries, and even video games have explored the case, each offering new theories and suspects. And the suspects are a fascinating cast of characters. There was Dr. George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles physician with a dark side. His own son, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD homicide detective, spent years building a case against his late father. He found photos of a woman who resembled Elizabeth Short among his father's belongings and pointed to his father's medical training and alleged history of abuse as compelling evidence. Some investigators believe Steve Hodel solved the case, but with his father long dead, the theory can never be definitively proven. Then there were other suspects, like Leslie Dillon, a bellhop and aspiring writer who seemed to know intimate details of the crime, and Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner who Elizabeth had briefly lived with. The list goes on, a tangled web of possibilities that have been debated for decades. But at the heart of it all is Elizabeth Short herself. For too long she was just the Black Dahlia, a one-dimensional victim defined by her gruesome end. But she was a real person, a young woman from Massachusetts, who had hopes and fears, who loved movies and daydreamed of a life on the silver screen. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend. The public spectacle of a murder stripped her of her humanity, turning her into a symbol, a cautionary tale. It's important to remember the person behind the infamous nickname. The legacy of the Black Dahlia is a complex one. It's a story about the birth of modern media. Sensation, a blueprint for the true crime genre, and a haunting look at the darkness that can lie beneath the glamorous facade. But most of all, it's a story of a life cut brutally short, and a question that has echoed through the decades. Who killed the Black Dahlia? The fact that we still don't know is perhaps the most chilling part of the story. It remains America's most iconic unsolved murder, a cold case that will likely never be closed. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you have a theory about who the killer might be? Let me know in the comments below. It's a conversation that has been going on for over 75 years, and it shows no signs of stopping. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in more deep dives into historical mysteries, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. See you next time.